Well, hello. So, there is nothing better than cycling through a chill evening and then returning home to a nice scotch. I'm down to my last couple of shots or so of this Glenlivet. I'll certainly need to replenish my stock sometime soon. Guess I deserve it for all the fidgeting I did with the stupid water heater today. If it wasn't for that electrical work and the potential city ordinance against do-it-yourself stuff, in terms of electronics or electrical systems in the home, I'd install a tankless myself. Cycling vibes and domestic woes aside, how are you? I really hope that my American compatriots have found their chicks stimulating and are, as the new mantra goes, staying safe. Speaking of safety, it seems that our national parks aren't very safe. It's been several years now that I've followed along with David Paulides, all his appearances on various podcasts and big-time radio shows like Coast to Coast AM. Now, to my understanding, Paulides is a retired police officer who became intrigued about missing persons in national parks after a conversation with a ranger. These are not your typical run-of-the-mill disappearances. Paulides claims to filter out folks who've run away, gotten attacked by animals, or simply gotten lost. What makes these cases so interesting is their commonalities. Often when the bodies are recovered, they are near water, missing articles of clothing, face down, miles and miles away from where they were last seen, or in an area that has been intensely searched. Those missing that are recovered alive are often very young and give vague accounts that in no way satisfy questions about how a 2-year-old managed to traverse miles of wilderness, face exposure to harsh elements, and appear entirely intact, well kept even. As a fan of mystery, the woods, and the unexplained, I'll probably return to this topic many times in the course of this vlog series. For today, let's begin with a skeptical look at Paulides' accounts from, skepticalinquirer.org in an article by Kyle Paulides entitled An Investigation of the Missing 411 Conspiracy. Now, right off the bat here, the fact that he calls it the Missing 401 Conspiracy, I find to be a bit of well poisoning, because Mr. Paulides does not mention any conspiracy. This is kind of something that appears to be done here to associate Mr. Paulides with conspiracy theorists, with wackos, with kooks. I'm not really a fan of this, as I said, sort of well poisoning. But let's go to the article. It's not a bad article, but it does have some holes that I will be going through as we read along. So, an investigation of the Missing 401 Conspiracy by Kyle Paulides, from Volume 41, Number 4, published on July of August 2017. Paragraph 1. People are going missing from America's national parks under mysterious circumstances, and the National Park Service is obstructing attempts to investigate these events. At least that's the claim made by author David Paulides in his Missing 411 series of books. I suppose that's the claim that David made. From everything that I've seen over the years that I've been listening to him, the Park Service seems reticent, not necessarily actively obstructing his attempts, although he does make a sort of suggestion in a nonverbal way that there might be obstruction, unless I have failed to hear him say so outright. Paulides has classified over 1,440 missing person cases under the Missing 411 label. At its core, Missing 411 is the vague claim that something unusual is occurring related to deaths and disappearances in national parks. Now, he will go, I believe, to outline how this claim is vague, but it's not going to satisfy me. And the reason for this being is that Paulides is not vague. He has very specific criteria for what qualifies as a strange enough case to go into his little portfolio of cases that he's found 35 geographic clusters of, or maybe more than that even. Anyhow, the concept has been steeped in the milieu of conspiracy and the supernatural, as Paulides frequently appears on paranormal-oriented radio shows and podcasts to discuss it. A forthcoming documentary appears to be in the works as well. I have been unable to ascertain the meaning of 411. I can only speculate that it's a slang synonym for information, although missing info isn't much of a better moniker. Now, here's the thing. He's just going ahead and attacking his choice of title, his branding. It's all very oriented towards making Paulides look silly. I don't know if this is intentional or part of the general makeup of people who are so gung-ho about calling themselves skeptics and being part of the skeptical movement, but it very well could be. It's just a trend that I've noticed because I used to be in these sorts of circles. Attended a couple of free thought meetings, subscribed to Skeptic Magazine, Michael Shermer's little program there with the amazing Randy, who is in fact amazing, appearing in a lot of articles as a writer. But anyhow, just wanted to lay that out there. This is just negative from the get-go. Interestingly, Paulides has consistently avoided providing any explanation for the cause of these supposedly mysterious disappearances. He joined the ranks of those who are just asking questions. One might assume Paulides, founder of the North American Bigfoot Search and author of the book Tribal Bigfoot, would arrive at a cryptozoological explanation. While this hasn't happened yet, it may, as Missing 411 appears to be an evolving mythology. Now that is an interesting fact because I did not know that Paulides was founder of the North American Bigfoot Search and author of the book Tribal Bigfoot. Well, there we go. Score one for our skeptic friend. When pressed for a casual explanation, Paulides has remained evasive. He sees his role as an investigator pointing to a problem, not a cause. Alien abduction, ghost involvement, fairy kidnappers, and transdimensional chupacabra can all be swapped in and out as possible explanations for this apparent mystery. And that's the fun aspect of this. This is why I like listening to Coast AM. Not entirely for serious reasons. It's kind of a form of escapism and helps me to come up with ideas for stories. It has a certain vibe to it that I think a lot of folks are familiar with by now, especially folks that maybe subscribe to me. But that being said, Paulides, as a former police officer and as a very kind of milquetoast sort of guy, while he will entertain these theories when listeners or people who've bought his book or talk show hosts ask him about them, he's not going to jump on top of them and claim it to be one way or the other. He just presents these cases as being very, very strange, which they are. And as this article from Skeptical Inquirer goes on, he does talk about the cases, but he talks about cases that seem to be cherry-picked to seem insignificant. Because just earlier today, as I was preparing to do this podcast, I was listening to various Paulides appearances, and he talked about, the cases of a 2-year-old walking for 16 miles or so. That's, beside him being kidnapped in some natural way, is the only possible explanation. But the kidnapping in the natural way, with the amount of searching that went on, is highly dubious. And again, it's repeated over and over again in these geographic clusters. That's what makes it strange. I'm not saying it's absolutely necessarily paranormal, but it is bizarre. It's not as simple and clear-cut as this fellow, Mr. Kyle Paulides, makes it out to be. The topic seems to be constructed with intentional ambiguity, promoting any non-scientific idea to fill in as possible explanation. No, he leaves it open, and he often discusses why certain wacky ideas are wrong. For instance, he has a vlog series, and he entertained notions from people who are of a religious nature that say, well, if only they had prayed or they've been of this faith, this would not have happened. And he explains, well, these young children didn't have very much time to be crazy sinners, and a lot of the people that go missing are religious or happen to go missing on religious type retreats like deacons and things. So yeah, he's not looking to promote this empty space where you can have a God of the gaps thing with these theories, if you're actually paying attention to what he's saying, or if you're not cherry picking what he's saying to make him look wacky and discredited for the purpose of being a skeptical inquirer, as it were. Despite Paulides' appearances on Coast to Coast AM, talks at MUFON conferences, and interest in Bigfoot, proper skepticism requires us to entertain the missing 411 claims independently of his history and other beliefs. We should not dismiss this idea outright in the same way we wouldn't dismiss Linus Pauling's legacy in chemistry because of his pseudoscientific beliefs about vitamin C. No clue about that. But yes, you should remain open-minded about what David has to say, despite his associations. That is to your credit. Could it be that an underfunded and understaffed National Park Service and related police departments lack the tools and ingenuity to determine that an unidentified serial killer is at work in the parks? This is not outside of the realm of possibility, except for the range of time in which these disappearances occur in these geographic clusters that qualifies them as missing 411 cases. David hammers this point home all of the time. If it was a serial killer, it would not proliferate at the rate that it does with the commonalities that it has through the breadth of geography that it does. Though Paulides has never put this particular claim forward, there is a non-trivial possibility that he's inadvertently produced a data set from which this conclusion could emerge. No, it couldn't emerge from it, and no, he did not inadvertently produce a data set as such for the reasons I just mentioned. This is just, again, an extrapolation, an ab ovo philosophizing towards an end. It's a priori conclusion. Of course, it does seem that Paulides leans toward more supernatural conclusions. No, he leans to saying he doesn't know, and that he doesn't know to the extent that it might as well be supernatural. That's the impression that I've gotten. And you can go ahead and listen to Paulides for your own, to draw your own conclusions. Continuing with the article now. I was fascinated by the intrigue of the missing 411. Its Blair Witch vibe would have me eagerly in line on opening night of a Hollywood thriller with this premise. My curiosity was also piqued by the vagueness of the claim and the remote possibility that Paulides could be onto something legitimate, but with a practical explanation. Okay, very well. So this person, Mr. Kyle Paulides, is intrigued by this because of its mystique and thinks, well, what if this really is a mystery but with a practical explanation? And so he embarks on a skeptical investigation using some of the approaches he's learned here on the pages of Skeptical Inquirer and similar books on the subject. So again, he's mired in a sort of pattern of thinking, which is actually not a bad pattern of thinking to take if you're being truly skeptical. If you're not being skeptical for the sake of, there's this in this community an understanding of misunderstanding, in my opinion, of Occam's razor, where they think that the most minimalist thing is necessarily correct. The proper reading of Occam's razor is the most minimalist explanation that accounts for all of the details is most likely to be correct, but is not by necessity correct. And furthermore, there is often missing or confused data. So you can't just have this poisoned well, this a priori, this is mundane mindset from the beginning. And of course, you should look for mundane explanations. But even within the parameters of those mundane explanations, there has to be room in the presence of extraordinary enough phenomenon for extraordinary explanations. Yeah, all right. I determined that following Hyman's categorical imperative, do not try to explain something until you are sure there is something to be explained, was the best place to start. Yeah, well, there is something to be explained. How are these people disappearing? Are the supposed missing 401 cases real cases or works of fiction? I used a random number generator, okay, nerd, to select several pages from missing 411, Western United States and Canada, to conduct a detailed verification for the first case on each page. And when I call him a nerd, I don't really mean that in a playful way. I mean to very, legitimately call him a pedant. Every case I checked related to real events. Paulides is not making these disappearances up. Yeah, someone besides you would have caught on to this by this point. This is another thing about these skeptics. I'm glad that he's verifying this for himself, but this thing has been talked about for years and years and years prior to 2017. And these books have been out, and Paulides has been putzing around doing his thing, and you would not be the first person to blow this out of the water. I'm not saying that's what this guy was thinking as he was doing this, but it is something that really, I'm again going to repeat, I was part of this early to mid, 2008, 2010, Four Horsemen, kind of skeptical milieu. So I understand certain things about it and the cuntiness inherent in it. One case involved a hunter who never returned from his hunt. His car was found, but his body was never recovered. A second case involved a hiker. Paulides mentions that law enforcement officials have said they believe foul play was involved. As with any unexpected loss of life, both cases are tragedies. Yet both cases are banal and devoid of any apparently unusual qualities. Are they? In another case, because if you make that claim, as he just did, please elaborate. I'm not seeing elaboration. Let's read that paragraph again, just to double check. One case involved a hunter who never returned from his hunt. His car was found, but his body was never recovered. A second case involved a hiker. Paulides mentions that law enforcement officials have said they believe foul play was involved. As with any unexpected loss of life, both cases are tragedies. Yet both cases are banal and devoid of any apparently unusual qualities. I don't see an elaboration. That explains the very last sentence, that both cases are banal and devoid of any apparently unusual qualities. Where is that thoroughgoing skepticism here? To satisfy my skeptical self, my skepticism about skeptics. In another case, two stranded parents with known drug problems had a car breakdown during a snowstorm. Paulides reports the parents' remains were found scattered. I was unable to confirm the scattering, but I was able to confirm their infant child was never located. Well, that could have a very mundane explanation. But, again, why did Paulides include this in his 411 cases? Because he generally only includes cases with strange similarities, such as being found face down, which is apparently an odd way to be found, and he would know that it was, being a police officer, being found near bodies of water, missing articles of clothing, the nature of how the missing has occurred, the nature of the searches and their thoroughness, in contrast with the inability to find these people. The oldest victim in my audit involved a 69-year-old hiker climbing Mount Shasta, moving alone in wind conditions estimated at 70 miles an hour. Once he split off from his companions, he was never seen again. Now that is a very odd case, is it not? That there's a 70-year-old man, basically, because 69, 70, pretty close. He's climbing a mountain, alone in wind conditions estimated at 70 miles an hour. So maybe he got blown somewhere? That's a possibility. But again, once those winds died down, you would think that he would be found. Maybe not. That one I might give to him. I was finding these cases to be fairly mundane until I arrived at the hiker's disappearance. Following a deadpan factual reporting of the details, Paulides quotes a local person saying cryptically that according to local legend, beings called Lemurians lived underneath Mount Shasta. Maybe the Lemurians got Carl. Yeah, he's being playful. He's entertaining possibilities because he he's presenting these odd cases, and there's not really any real official explanation to how these things occurred. You can speculate about a mundane explanation, but you're not really able to prove it one way or the other. And so because of the frequency and nature of these, he says, this might as well be this weird, crazy shit. And there are these local legends about this. Why wouldn't he do that? It's not like he's necessarily promoting this as an explanation. It's a throwing up of hands. The text is decorated sparsely with this and other head-scratching non sequiturs. It's not a head-scratching non sequitur. Do you not? Okay, maybe this guy is an autist or something. But when you're just shooting the shit and you're talking about, or even if you're actually writing a book and you're talking about mysterious things and somebody says something outlandish, and then you happen to say, well, it might as well be that. Or, hey, there's these legends about Lemurians. Okay, Paulides might not even necessarily think that it is Lemurians. Maybe there is some kind of a strange group of people living there, like some kind of hermit-like folk that are out killing people. There's just so many possibilities with that explanation. It's just head-scratching non sequiturs. It's not. It's just not. For example, in the last case of my brief audit, a woman named Amy disappears while exercising. Her body was never recovered, but her wristwatch was found in a riverbed years later. Paulides points out that years after that, a woman named Anne disappeared from the same place. He felt the need to point out that both of their names start with A, and their first names only had 3 letters. I can only presume Paulides is open to the possibility that some nefarious Batman villain is at work in this area. Beware the 3-letter killer. All right, that's a silly one. But he's a detective, and he's looking for patterns. That's what detectives do. And so he's doing it, and he's mentioning it because it's an interesting factoid. There's a lot of other stuff that he mentions that's not as silly, but you cherry-pick the silliest thing to put on here to make him look like a kook, which is, again, I love Penn and Teller, I love their show Bullshit, but oftentimes they will put the craziest people on there for the sake of entertainment. And this, to me, is also at the heart of what these skeptics are partially doing to sell copy. It's moments like these, or his statement that the fact that berries and berry bushes play a common role in many disappearances is quite intriguing. Well, it is, because berry bushes and berries, while being common to the forests, is not necessarily entirely widespread through an entire forest. I go hiking quite often. I'm somewhat of an outdoorsman. We used to own a campground. If there's people around berries and berry bushes, that would indicate that there might be some kind of wildlife involved that's attracted to that area, or the natural cover that provides is a perfect atmosphere in which to kidnap people. And again, this right here is something that a detective would do and would say. So there's no reason for it to make Mr. Paulides say, sometimes makes me wonder if this work isn't a satire. No, you're being a silly ass. Could such a statement be a wink to the reader? No. Or could this be a viral marketing technique for an upcoming video game or feature film? While not implausible, I don't think that's the case. Well, thank you. Everything about Paulides' work seems sincere. My interpretation is that he genuinely believes something mysterious is going on. He's factual in most of his reporting and generally respectful of the missing. Never is someone faulted for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. If anything, Paulides praises the missing for being in peak physical condition and deeply experienced with outdoor activities. That is another very strange thing. You have these hunters disappearing, these outdoorsmen. Yeah, so why isn't that mentioned and discussed in detail in this skeptical article? Making their disappearances by natural cases seemingly all the more unlikely. Not all missing persons cases, we finally get to the criteria, qualify as missing 411. Paulides describes the pattern of these cases. The pattern consists of some loose criteria, such as canine rescue dogs not being able to pick up a scent. If true, in a given case, it's evidence for labeling it as missing 411. If false, this contrary fact can be ignored. No. Let's look at this again. Not all missing persons cases qualify as missing 411. Paulides describes the pattern of these cases. The pattern consists of some loose criteria, such as canine dogs not being able to pick up a scent. That's not a loose criteria. If true in a given case, it's evidence for labeling it as missing 411. If false, this contrary fact can be ignored. Now, If false, but then there are other supporting facts such as the face down or near water or there's an extensive search effort, it's like a 3 out of 4 kind of case. This is just misleading. Another optional criteria is victims being found. It's not optional. With their clothing removed, typically pants and shoes or boots. Paulides is quick to point out that voluntary removal of such items is totally irrational in most circumstances. I didn't know what to make of this detail until someone pointed me to the phenomenon of paradoxical undressing. This is a condition sometimes found in people experiencing hypothermia, who feel irrationally hot and remove clothing to cool themselves. I presume Paulides, like me, must not have been aware of this fairly simple explanation. I believe he actually addresses this very thing in one of his talks, because there was a man who took shelter very close to a farmhouse inside of like a hollowed out tree instead of going to the farmhouse and knocking with all of his clothes removed. And I don't think that all of the areas where these people are going missing are necessarily cold. So the hypothermia explanation may not even hold, but that is actually something that I thought about myself when I heard him mention this. So I'll kind of give that as a halfway point to this Skeptical Inquirer guy, Mr. Kyle Paulides. Another optional criterion in cases, please stop calling them optional criterion. They are strange coincidences. It's a very specific thing. It's not optional. It's not like he just pulled them out of his ass. It's something that is atypical from a missing person's case that is, on the other hand, typical to these cases occurring in geographical clusters at national parks. This is what is driving me mental about this article. Where a deceased body is recovered but found a distance or elevation away from the last known whereabouts that defies common sense. Yet Paulides doesn't present any Twilight-esque cases of people showing up in bafflingly distant places, except there has been a recent one, by the way, of a doctor who went skiing and was found in a completely random place, and he had all his sat phones and things, and for some reason just ended up somewhere else. And there may well be an explanation to that I'm not aware of due to the doctor's personal life, but no, it does defy common sense, like the toddler that had helicopters and things looking for him in the 50s, had a whole, troops of the soldiers, like thousands of them, scouring the area because they were living near a base in Washington State. And they didn't find him until a few days later, perfectly intact. There's just so much that's being omitted in this article just to make David look like an ass. And it's driving me mad. In truth, most of these supposedly common sense defying distances are just a few miles. They are not just a few miles, and you also have to consider who's traveling those few miles. Again, he's cherry picking. Granted, terrain and conditions have a huge impact on lost hikers. I don't want to dismiss anything outright due to low magnitude, but I don't find anything exceptional in the cases I reviewed. The strangest case I recall was a hiker, and he put strangest in parentheses. That you recall because you're not very fucking thorough, apparently. He was found 3 days later, 14 miles from his last known location. To me, as a hiker, this is not an implausible distance to cover in that time. It is if you're going over a mountain, my friend. And again, this fellow at the end of this article will mention that it is going to be his first time at a national park very soon. And it does not preclude him never climbing a mountain or anything like that. But, dear God. It would be interesting if Paulides would rank his cases by inexplicable distance. If I found nothing odd about the best example, it would be simple to dismiss his second best, and so on. Pedant nerd. Mathematician. Mathematics is not science. Mathematics is an abstracted system based on logical assertions within a closed... Yeah. I'm just so annoyed. Failing to meet these and any of the other criteria of the missing 411 pattern does not disqualify a case from fitting in the category. In fact, actually being missing is not technically required. It is required because what he's going to mention is people being found. Because the people that were found had to have been missing at one point. So they were missing cases that fall within the context of this strange phenomenon of these missing people. A minority of cases in the catalog involve missing people who were recovered alive. He even says it right there, missing people who were recovered alive. So it is part of a pattern of missing people.
Curiously, these all seem to be young children. I suppose an adult gone missing and found can self-attest that their missing time was explained by ordinary circumstances, except when they aren't. I think I've heard some cases from adults seeing very strange things from bow hunters and such. Children may not have the same developmental functions to coherently account for their whereabouts, thus leaving a gap to be filled with the possibility of something unusual. No, the reason that this children thing is unusual is not just their lack of explanation, which is very easy to say one way or the other, but it's the fact that they traversed these vast distances or were then later found in a place that had been thoroughly searched. Please don't skip over these very crucial details if you're going to call yourself a skeptic. With such imprecise, they are not imprecise criteria, as I've pointed out ad nauseum so far. See, he just keeps hammering home, imprecise, vague, etc. He keeps on repeating it. It's a very lawyery thing to do. He's trying to insert it into your subconscious as he's cherry picking this information. It seems Paulides considers himself the only person fully qualified to identify missing persons cases belonging to the missing 411 or not. Well, he's the guy who started this investigation, and he's the guy most familiar with this. He's the guy who came up with the criterion, and I'm sure that if a person understood his system enough and brought these to his attention, he would agree that it was, in fact, a missing 411 case. That's not a point against him. On the whole, I find no outstanding cases in my research of missing 411, because you didn't want to. There's a surprising absence of anything spooky. No one is found a decade later without having aged a day. A missing 411 victim hasn't appeared enigmatically on the opposite side of the world, except I think the doctor was. And you don't have to have these super extraordinary events for the events to be extraordinary, for the commonalities of how the bodies are found to be extraordinary. No cryptic notes or ciphers appear in the book's pages. None are needed, my friend. The cases are disappointingly typical of what one would expect from a missing persons case. Again, no. Paulides is a detective. This person writing this article is a data weasel. He works with data, as in computational. So, who has a better grip on what is typical in a missing persons case? Now, this again is a fallacy known as appeal to authority. I'm treading very close on that territory there. But because David has explained the mechanisms of how these differ from a typical missing persons case, face down, etc., I have seen a distinction made, and that is not mentioned herein within the confines of this article. The proposed unusualness of these cases seems hardly greater than one would find for a rare and unplanned occurrence such as a disappearance. How? By what criteria? By what standard? You're just making an assertion. But could there be a mystery in the aggregate of these cases? Perhaps in total, they paint a grim picture. Unfortunately, Paulides has not explored this idea. The argument, such as it is, seems more of the form of look at all these cases. Even if one or two are explainable, they can't all be explainable. That's never said, and I'm sure that David, if he found that these cases were explainable, would attest to the fact. But they're not, given the commonalities that I've mentioned. No matter how many half-groups one collects, they never sum to a whole truth because of the strangeness of the cases. You know, that you can say, oh, well, this person did X, Y, or Z, but it's the pattern that makes it interesting, that makes it unusual, that makes it suspect. We're not drawing any conclusions. We're saying that in the absence of a conclusion, there is something interesting going on. And you're trying to make the conclusion that nothing interesting is going on and there is absolutely no connection, which again puts the onus of proof on you, because it's not necessarily a more likely scenario that there is no connection to these cases. To be sure, within the missing 401 data set are cases of unsolved foul play, kidnappings, private suicides, animal attacks, people looking to disappear and assume new identities, and other natural explanations. Yes, certainly some of these would have that. But again, the way that they are found, in the places that they are found, is what's making them distinct from an unsolved foul play, a kidnapping, or an animal attack. It's the intactness of the bodies, for instance, that, it's not an animal attack. Being completely drained of blood, being found in bodies of water, next to smiley faces in the case of the urban disappearances or something to that effect. Very, very odd. Very odd. There was a case of a woman being somehow found in a water tank that she could not have really gotten into in any very reasonable way. That doesn't mean that there isn't a very reasonable explanation. It's not like she was teleported there. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying it is more curious, also because it falls into the criteria of being in water, that why wouldn't Paulides consider this? Perhaps we might find room for unusual observations if we consider the frequency of these events. People disappear. Of all disappearances in a year, are a suspicious number of them coming from national parks. In truth, that's a very difficult statistic to analyze. People do disappear, and any disappeared person must have a last known location. However, that doesn't make every location on the planet equally probable for generating a missing person. I looked into this briefly and found that if anything, you're less likely to disappear from a national park than from a major city. And Paulides comes to the same conclusion, and he talks about urban disappearances as well. So you're boffing with all of this mathematical gobbledygook that you get from your profession is not at all discounting anything that Paulides is putting forward. I'm willing to play along a bit. Oh, you are so generous. Let's assume a disproportionately high number of disappearances occur in national parks. What exactly is the responsibility of the National Park Service? Paulides has called the day-to-day operators of the parks good people. He takes issue with the administration, finding them somewhere between incompetent and complicit. He's frustrated with their response to his Freedom of Information Act request and accuses them of obstructing his investigation. Well, they have been. They just have. There are moments where it seems that he's implicating the NPS in a conspiracy. Yeah, where it seems, because they're acting strangely. But other times his perspective is softer, because he doesn't know, and because he's a reasonable fucking guy. He claims it would be incorrect to state that the NPS has not cooperated with my efforts. However, in some cases they were evasive, which from his accounts they were. Yet elsewhere, Paulides is frustrated the NPS won't produce the documentation he seeks. He asserts, I believe they do have the data, and that data they possess would shock the average American citizen. And he qualifies this based upon his experience working with law enforcement agencies and high-ranking officials within these organizations, saying, look, they keep this data around because these are very fastidious people that want to know these things. I have confirmed he made many FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, requests, and some were denied. Apparently, to learn more, I would need to initiate a FOIA request for a list of the FOIA requests Paulides made, or you could ask him. You can do that. I don't think I have much to learn, however. Paulides doesn't seem to lie thank you about details. With multiple books under his belt, satisfying his requests might indeed be costly. If the NPS has been dismissive or evasive, that's not proof of anything mysterious. Yet it is, because wouldn't they want to make their parks safer? I spoke with an NPS public affairs representative about the handling of missing persons cases. Cases are entered into the National Law Enforcement Telecommunications System. This is a federated data sharing system used by law enforcement nationwide. I await proof that any case has failed to be entered, and I await proof that it has. Because, according to Paulides, he was unable to get lists from the parks, and this system does not necessarily contain all of the cases that he's talking about. To be fair, it would not shock me if independent law enforcement organizations did not have the resources to extensively review the inlets. If suspicious patterns existed, it could possibly go unnoticed, which is what Paulides said. Of course, the burden of proof is on the claimant, which is why he wrote a bunch of books about it and interviewed a bunch of people, and has out in the open with his claims, where it's your now burden of proof to go through them in a far more thorough manner than you're doing with these a priori assumptions, my friend. I got in touch with former Ranger Andrea Langford, author of Ranger Confidential. She brought to my attention that there exists some degree of controversy about the operation of the parks and the ranger system. It's a broad topic, but I'll give some highlights. Rangers may be asked to wear too many hats without appropriate training. Some believe the parks are understaffed. There's a perspective that rangers are not equipped to handle some law enforcement activities that fall under their jurisdiction. Some people call for reform. I've yet to reach a personal conclusion on these side topics, because they don't suit your narrative. It is an intriguing discussion, but not one that has anything to do with making disappearances unusual. Not necessarily, but it's still strange. If the NPS is poorly structured, overextended, incompetent, or corrupt, it would be unfortunate, but not mysterious. Yet it could be mysterious given that these disappearances occur and they're not very well followed up with. You know, if they were entering them into that data set, I assume they would know they were entering them into that data set that he had previously mentioned. Surely Paulides knows of these claims. I'm unaware if he's taking a position. Whether he agrees with criticisms of the ranger system or not, it's curious a comment that is not more prominent in his research. I encountered no place where he weighs in. I believe that he has weighed in on these things, of these people being overworked, etc., and has addressed it in terms of, look, these people know the amount of toilet paper they have on site. They have the largest law enforcement contingent that is federated in the country. So the idea that they would not have lists of missing persons cases that any local podunk sheriff's office would have is highly dubious. Okay, my friend? Mr. Paulides? Paulides is also displeased with the response of the media, stating news services sometimes temper the story or don't ask specific questions in regards to the case. This suffers between accusations of conspiracy or incompetence. The media is incompetent. We live in a circus of it. Don't give me that shit. It's a claim made broadly without any specific evidence. It doesn't need any specific evidence because they're not asking pertinent questions of how did this happen, where is this person, yada yada, etc. What specific evidence are the news media failing to ask about and the NPS trying to silence? The NPS are trying to silence the fucking missing persons reports that they most likely have given the information we've just given. That's the point. The point is that their very silence is by its nature suspicious. Their reticence is. Either that or their inability as one of the contingencies with this federal reach that does not keep these records, these very easy to keep records. I've exhausted my exploration for anything genuinely unusual because you decided to. After careful review, to me, not a single case stands out, nor do these frequencies involved seem outside of expectations. The lack of any specific claim, but the frequencies do seem outside of expectations because of the geographical clusters. You didn't mention the geographical clusters. You didn't mention all of the criteria by which it's listed to be a missing 411 case. And yeah, so you can't make that claim at all. The lack of any specific claim affords this idea the listicity to be unfalsifiable. No, that just means he's not jumping to conclusions. And a sinister veneer makes it attractive to conspiracy-minded. It's not necessarily a sinister veneer. It's an interesting veneer. And conspiracy-minded, I mean, my God, what about Russiagate? What about Trump getting peed on by Russian hookers? It's everywhere, this conspiracy thing. And you're thinking that this is a conspiracy by Paulides and his readers to make this look like a conspiracy. Dude, the word conspiracy doesn't mean anything except people getting together to do something that they don't want other people to know about for their benefit. That exists everywhere at all times throughout history. You're being an ass. From the way in which I've observed it proliferate through the paranormal media, I suspect missing 411 will remain a curious shelf theory for some time to come. Yet interesting things remain curious for a long time to come, especially when they are delivered by a person that's at least seeming to be as authentic as David Paulides, with the background that David Paulides has and the thoroughness with which he presents his information. My friend, when any missing persons case comes up, believers may be reminded of it, giving it a small injection of life in their cultural consciousness. Yeah, if there's something that comes up that meets the criteria of the missing 411, people are going to remember it because it's an interesting event that doesn't... This is just going on to people are dumb and they're jumping on a bandwagon and they're keeping a crazy conspiracy meme going because they're simps and I am a wise skeptic. I'm just sickened by this. For me, as someone who visited his first national park last year, that means in 2016, for fucking Christ's sake, I'm grateful we have these national treasures.
I look forward to visiting many more with only the most prosaic of concerns any responsible hiker or camper should have, which is what Paulides has always said. He's like, look, go out to these parks. They're great, wonderful places that are generally safe if you follow common sense guidelines to staying safe. He's not trying to scare people of going off to the parks, which is what you're implying in that sentence. Kyle Paulides is a data science consultant and founder of skeptic.com, which explores the skeptical perspective on machine learning, artificial intelligence, statistics, and all things data related. Okay, so he's a boffin. Of course he's going to write something like this. All right, folks. Well, hopefully you found that entertaining. You learned some new things. You got a little bit of a buzz from the rant I did. Thanks so much for listening. My main website is fractaljournal.com, where you'll find stories, ideas, and more. Cheers.